Let's be honest for a second. If someone walked up to you today and said, "Hey, I'm gonna build a shoe company out of my garage, sell shoes out of the trunk of my car, and one day beat Adidas, Puma, and every other shoe brand on the planet," you probably nod politely and slowly back away. But that's almost exactly what happened. And the wildest part? The guys who did it weren't shoe industry veterans. They weren't fashion moguls with deep pockets and industry connections. One of them was a middle-distance runner from Oregon who hated losing, and the other was a college track coach who liked to pour rubber into kitchen appliances. This is the story of how Nike went from zero to one of the most recognized brands in the history of human civilization. Not just in sports, in civilization. Let's go back to the beginning. Phil Knight grew up in Portland, Oregon, a quiet, somewhat unremarkable city in the Pacific Northwest that most people outside America probably couldn't point to on a map. Knight ran middle-distance track at the University of Oregon, and he was good. Not Olympic-level good, but good enough to understand the sport from the inside. Good enough to know what it felt like to push your body to its limit and have your shoes let you down. See, in the late 1950s and early 1960s, if you were an American runner who wanted serious athletic shoes, your options were basically Adidas and Puma, both German brands, both dominating the global market, and both expensive enough that most college athletes couldn't afford them without flinching. American shoe companies at the time were making shoes that looked athletic but performed like you'd bought them at a grocery store. Knight saw the gap. He just didn't know what to do with it yet. After graduating from Oregon, he enrolled in Stanford's Graduate School of Business. And here's where things get interesting, because in one of his classes, he wrote a paper. A simple business paper. The concept: import high-quality Japanese athletic shoes into the United States and undercut the German brands on price. It wasn't a revolutionary idea on paper, but it was the right idea at the right time, written by someone who was willing to actually go do it. Most people write business school papers and let them collect dust. Phil Knight got on a plane to Japan. In 1962, Knight flew to Japan, a country still rebuilding its global reputation after World War II. A country whose products most Americans still associated with cheap imitations rather than quality manufacturing. He showed up at the headquarters of a company called Onitsuka Tiger, which you might know today as ASICS, and basically talked his way into a meeting. He told them he represented a company called Blue Ribbon Sports. He did not actually represent a company called Blue Ribbon Sports. Blue Ribbon Sports did not exist. He made it up in the elevator on the way up to the meeting. The Onitsuka executives asked what American distributors had already seen their shoes. Knight gave them the names of companies he invented on the spot. He was 24 years old, thousands of miles from home, lying through his teeth in a foreign country, trying to import shoes for a company that didn't exist yet. And somehow it worked. Onitsuka Tiger agreed to send him samples. When Knight got back to Portland, he did two things. First, he actually created Blue Ribbon Sports. Second, he called his old track coach, Bill Bowerman, and asked if he wanted to be a partner. Bowerman said yes. They each put in $500. Now, if Phil Knight was the business brain of this operation, Bill Bowerman was something else entirely. He was an obsessive, relentless tinkerer who treated every shoe like a puzzle he hadn't solved yet. Bowerman was the head track coach at the University of Oregon, and during his time there, he coached some of the greatest distance runners in American history. He was legendary in the running community. But what made him truly unusual was that he couldn't leave shoes alone. He would take shoes apart. He would rebuild them. He would sew in new materials, adjust the weight, change the heel, and test them on his athletes. He believed that if you could shave even a fraction of an ounce off a shoe, at scale, over thousands of steps in a race, you could change outcomes. He believed in the physics of running in a way most people in the industry simply didn't care enough to explore. When Blue Ribbon Sports got their first shipment of Onitsuka Tiger samples, Bowerman did what Bowerman always did. He took one look at them, put them on the workbench, and started thinking about how to make them better. This dynamic, Knight handling the business, Bowerman handling the product, turned out to be one of the most powerful founding partnerships in corporate history. The early days of Blue Ribbon Sports were not glamorous. There was no office, no storefront, no marketing department. There was Phil Knight, his car, and a pile of shoes. Knight drove to track meets up and down the West Coast, set up a folding table, and sold Onitsuka Tiger shoes directly to runners. He talked to athletes about the shoes in a way that most salespeople never do, as a fellow runner who understood what they needed. He knew the vocabulary. He knew the problems. And he was selling shoes that were genuinely better and cheaper than what most American runners were wearing. Word spread the way word spreads in tight-knit communities, slowly at first and then all at once. Within a year, they were selling enough that they brought on their first employee, a former Oregon runner named Jeff Johnson, who turned out to be almost comically dedicated to the mission. Johnson opened the first actual Blue Ribbon Sports retail store in Santa Monica, California in 1966. He also, reportedly, wrote night letters almost every single week with ideas, updates, and observations, letters that night, by his own admission, rarely responded to. Johnson kept writing anyway. By the late 1960s, Blue Ribbon Sports was a functioning business. Not a massive one, but real. They had stores. They had employees. They had a relationship with Onitsuka Tiger. And then that relationship started to fall apart. Here's the thing about building your entire business on someone else's product. You are always one conversation away from disaster. By the late 1960s, Onitsuka Tiger had figured out that Blue Ribbon Sports was generating serious sales volume in the United States. They started having conversations with other potential American distributors. They started hinting that the relationship might change. Knight and Bowerman saw the writing on the wall. If they didn't control their own product, they didn't really control anything. So they made the decision that would change the company and the sports industry forever. They decided to make their own shoe. This wasn't just a business decision. It was a statement of intent. They weren't going to be a distributor forever. They were going to build something that was entirely theirs. In 1971, they rebranded. Blue Ribbon Sports became Nike, named after the Greek goddess of victory. The mythology of the name was intentional. These were people who loved track and field, loved competition, loved the idea of winning. Nike felt right. They needed a logo. A graphic design student at Portland State University named Carolyn Davidson had been doing some freelance work for the company. Knight asked her to design something, a mark that could go on a shoe. She came back with what we now call the swoosh. Knight wasn't immediately in love with it. His exact words, reportedly, were something along the lines of, "I don't love it, but I think it'll grow on me." He paid her $35. The swoosh went on to become one of the most valuable logos in the history of branding. Davidson was later given Nike stock in recognition of her contribution. But that first payment? $35. While all of this rebranding and legal restructuring was happening, Bowerman was in his kitchen doing something that sounds like a fever dream. He was pouring rubber into his wife's waffle iron. The story goes that Bowerman was eating waffles one morning and staring at the grid pattern on his breakfast, thinking, because Bowerman was always thinking about shoes, about sole design. The grid pattern of a waffle created a surface with both traction and flexibility. It distributed pressure across a wider surface. It was light. What if a shoe sole was designed like a waffle? He took rubber, poured it into the waffle iron, ruined the waffle iron. His wife, Barbara, was apparently very understanding about this, and created what became the Nike Waffle Trainer. The waffle sole was a genuine innovation. It gave runners better grip on the track without the extra weight of traditional spiked shoes. It was the kind of insight that only comes from someone who has spent decades obsessing over a single problem. The Waffle Trainer launched in 1974 and became Nike's first mainstream hit. Runners loved it. Sold out. It put Nike on the map in a way that nothing before it had quite managed. By the mid-1970s, Nike was a real company, but they were still playing catch-up with larger, more established brands. Adidas was still the dominant force in global athletics. Nike needed something to accelerate their growth. Their answer was athletes. Not advertising in the traditional sense, not billboards or magazine spreads with models posing in shoes. They wanted real athletes. Champions. People who would wear Nike because they believed in the product, and whose success would transfer to the brand by association. The strategy started modestly, but it culminated in 1984 with a deal that became the most famous athlete endorsement in history: Michael Jordan. Jordan was a rookie with the Chicago Bulls when Nike approached him. He had actually wanted to sign with Adidas. Nike offered him something unprecedented, not just money, but his own signature line. A shoe designed around him, for him, with his name on it. The Air Jordan 1 launched in 1985. The NBA fined Jordan $5,000 every time he wore them on the court because they violated the league's uniform policy. Nike paid the fines without blinking. The controversy was free marketing. People couldn't stop talking about the shoe. In its first year, the Air Jordan line generated $126 million in revenue. Nike had projected $3 million. That number isn't a typo. In 1988, Nike launched what is widely considered one of the greatest advertising campaigns in corporate history. 3 words: just do it. The tagline came from an advertising executive named Dan Whedon, who has said he was inspired, somewhat grimly, by the last words of a convicted murderer. He took something dark and turned it into a universal call to action. Just do it. Don't overthink. Don't make excuses. Don't wait until conditions are perfect. Just do it. It was perfect for Nike because it wasn't really about shoes. It was about a feeling, a mentality. The campaign featured athletes of all kinds, not just elite professionals, but everyday people pushing their limits. An 80-year-old man who ran 17 miles a day. A woman doing pull-ups at dawn. The message was that athleticism wasn't a club only professionals could join. It was a choice anyone could make. Nike's revenues went from $877 million to over $9 billion in the decade that followed the campaign's launch. Just do it indeed. This is the part of the story that most brand documentaries tend to skip over, because it's more comfortable to tell a straight line from obscurity to dominance. But Nike's history has some genuinely rough chapters. In the 1990s, the company came under intense scrutiny for labor practices in their overseas factories. Reports of poor working conditions, low wages, and child labor in factories in Indonesia, Vietnam, and China created a serious public relations crisis. Nike's response was slow and initially dismissive, which made things worse. Protests erupted on university campuses. Athletes started getting asked uncomfortable questions about their endorsement deals. The criticism forced real change. Nike overhauled its supply chain monitoring, raised wages, increased transparency, and eventually became something of a benchmark in the industry for corporate responsibility reforms. Not perfect, but meaningfully different from where they had been. The lesson for them, learned the hard way, was that a brand built on human aspiration can't afford to be seen as indifferent to actual human beings. They came back stronger. They kept innovating. They signed Tiger Woods. They signed Serena Williams. They built the Air Max and the Pegasus and the React and 100 other shoe technologies that kept runners and athletes and casual sneaker buyers coming back. Here's the thing that's easy to miss in the numbers and the deals and the famous logos. Nike's actual superpower was never really shoes. It was storytelling. From the very beginning, from Phil Knight selling Tigers out of his station wagon at track meets, talking to runners like a fellow runner, Nike understood that people don't buy products, they buy identity. They buy the version of themselves that the product promises to help them become. Bowerman's waffle sole was innovative. The swoosh is memorable. Michael Jordan was transcendent. But what tied all of it together was a consistent, coherent story about what Nike stood for. Victory, effort, the refusal to settle, the belief that any ordinary person on any ordinary morning could lace up their shoes and do something extraordinary. That story, told through athletes, through campaigns, through product design, through every touch point the company controlled, is what turned a small Oregon shoe distributor into a company worth over $100 billion. Phil Knight spent years building something he believed in before anyone else did. Bowerman ruined a waffle iron to make a better sole. A graphic design student designed a logo for $35 that became one of the most recognizable symbols on earth. And somewhere between all of that, Nike stopped being a shoe company. They became a feeling.